Happy Future Friday. Julia, I'm so glad to have you here. You are truly an awesome person leading an amazing company called Awesome People, which is both venture fund and talent collective and also dating app, apparently. I guess a dating matchmaking thing. I mean, as a personal recipient of these matchmaking services in the past. So I just think you're just such a light and amazing inspiration and have had just an amazing journey in the space, which I really admire. So I can't wait to dive into all things venture, people, and growth and startups. And before we do, I would love to get just your hot take on where you're calling in from and what you're focused on these days.
I'm calling in from Austin, Texas. I am at my house here. We are part of the COVID migration. I'm focused on primarily our venture fund, Awesome People Ventures, which focuses on Web3, pre-seed and seed.
To kind of get started, you've had a really interesting career and journey. You know, it's everything from being a director of marketing, being a head of growth for a company that was acquired by OneMedical, and then ultimately jumping into this world of really supporting founders. And I genuinely feel like you've had such an amazing approach to genuine relationship building with founders and genuine connection between talent and resources. And I'd love if you could share a bit about that journey of like how you ended up in this space and what it's looked like as being a VC. And also like in a way, the things that I think made you successful. Like you were super active actually in Twitter early on, which I think has been just enormous of how you've shared resources and then ended up building so much from that. So yeah, could you share, how did you start in like growth marketing and then end up in VC?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a lot of my career was, you either call it like accident or following my passions, but it definitely was not planned. So I started in growth. That was definitely an accident. So I had a startup idea when I was in college and I was like really convinced I wanted to build this thing. And I reached out to random people I found on LinkedIn that were in Silicon Valley. I'd never been to Silicon Valley. I hadn't heard of it, but I knew that, or I'd heard of it, but I didn't know much about it. I knew that was the place that you went to build things. This was like 2010, 2011. And one of them suggested that I come to Silicon Valley during my spring break. And so I go to Silicon Valley and I start pitching people like my random diagrams. They were literally like sketches of what I wanted to build, which now you'd call wireframes, but these were the world's like most janky wireframes. And one of these people that I was pitching was a founder, because I didn't know the difference between like founders, VCs, random people on the street. Like literally, I was like, I'm in Silicon Valley. And so he had a startup and he convinced me to join his startup. And that company ended up like blowing up spectacularly. But at the time, it was just the two co-founders and one engineer, and I was the first business hire. So they just made me the like head of marketing because there was no one else there. And so that was kind of an accident. So that's kind of where I started, and then really, really loved it and continued to do that. And then my next startup, I joined them as a head of growth because I realized our first startup did not have product market fit. And so I was very interested in like data and metrics and proving whether or not you had product market fit. So joined them as the head of growth. That company was then acquired by OneMedical. And then at OneMedical, I found myself helping a lot of other people that were trying to grow their company, which ended up by default being founders. And I just loved that, especially because the company that was acquired was in the nutrition coaching space, which is wellness is a huge passion of mine. And so wanting to help all the mental health founders, all the nutrition founders, the like fitness, like it was just so fun to help all these people. And so that just kind of became like a natural motion. And then after OneMedical, I took a sabbatical and I started a growth consultancy practice where I was just advising founders. And then advising founders turned into angel investing, and then angel investing eventually turned into the fund. So like it was just a very organic flow of like wanting to help people and finding different ways of doing that along the way, whether that was advising or consulting or ultimately investing.
When you think about like your vision for the future, where do you think this is all going? What excites you when you think about the world as it could be? What are you keeping track of?
Well, okay, so I think there's kind of like two different parts of the question in terms of like what inspires the playing with products and then what's the future vision of the world. And actually they kind of come from different places. So the first, in terms of staying on the cutting, I genuinely love products. Like I'm a little OCD about product. At different times I've held like the title product management that would get rolled up into bigger titles. But I genuinely love products. I love product teardowns. I love playing with them. I think some investors and some people can look at the world and like read about it and develop a hypothesis. I'm okay at that, but I'm much better at like playing with the thing and being able to envision the thing. And so I'm like, oh, tokens. We need a token. Like, let's see what happens. Like, oh, organizing people in these decentralized methods, like, sounds cool. Let's try to do it. Ooh, really hard. Like it's just like fun for me and like the way that I like to develop a perspective. And then in terms of like more macro, where do I think this is all going? I mean, I think a lot of things will continue to evolve to be more digital. So in our bubble, we call it like the blockchain. But even if you just make it really, really simple and talk about money and you think about like bartering with like trade goods to like eventually having like currencies, like multiple different currencies to converging on like a little bit of global currency where many things are traded in USD. And then you start having online payments and mobile payments, and then Stripe makes it really easy for everyone to have mobile payment. Like all of this stuff is just going to keep getting easier and easier and easier. And so when I look at that, I'm like, oh, internet money for sure. Like zero doubt in my head that that's going to be a thing. Like even when I think about the global financial ecosystem, I know central bank backed currencies is kind of a dirty word in our ecosystem, but like it just feels inevitable to me that all of this stuff will be digital. And so that's kind of one trend that I think is really interesting. I think we're continuing to see like more and more micro payments, and this has always been true. And so when you extrapolate that, you can start thinking about like little rewards and incentive systems and being able to pay, even in like mobile apps, like Web2 mobile apps, the notion of like microtransactions has been really prevalent now for many, many years. And you can just keep running that trend. And you're like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. Like collective ownership, making it easier for more people to get access to different asset class is like, that will probably be a thing for every alt asset class. And so just generally, when I look at a lot of these trends from like basic, better, faster, cheaper, whether it's like payments, ownership, the way that we like transact and communicate with each other, all of these things to me, I'm like, oh, Web3 for sure. Like Web3 has a role in all of these aspects, but it very much is like from that place, which is why I went all in on Web3 too. Like my first fund was just Web2. And then I started thinking about the problems that we were trying to solve in that fund. I was like, oh, many of these problems will actually be better solved in Web3.
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. And what do you feel like now is maybe your most controversial opinion? Like the thing that people may not agree with, but that you feel
very possible that central bank-backed currencies are kind of the killer use case for crypto, which is like terrible because it's, well, not terrible. It's not decentralized. It's not owned by the people. It's not, but like the thing that might net onboard the most amount of people to the blockchain very well be currencies run by countries that many people in this community do not like and centralized. Like it could be pretty ironic at the end of the day, but I think there's a good chance that that's the thing that onboards like the most amount of people to the blockchain.
Which then like blows up everything that we're, about, which is like identity and ownership.
Total fucking shit show, pardon my French.
Just all the things we're hoping for. Well, totally. We need really smart, amazing people and founders, building and focusing on the space. And so what do you think is the most exciting thing that you would want others to know, especially as you've been raising these two funds? Like, I think that's been really interesting too, like seeing you in this process of building your track record. And then now ultimately having people like Chris Dixon and Andreessen, like really backing the fund that you have, Fund 2. What was that journey like, and what was exciting, or what would you want people to know as they think about, what that journey can look like?
I think the biggest thing to know is like, just do whatever you want. Like life is so short, and most of the things that I think hold us back are just fear. And like, that's not really real. And so people just do whatever they want. And then I think the natural reaction is like, well, I can't do that. And it's like, well, like, but really, like, are you sure you can't? Like, have you tried? And the only reason why I started this fund is because one of my friends was watching me angel invest. He was like, Julia, this is really stupid. You're basically running cash flow zero. You're like consulting and then investing 100% of it. You should start a fund. And I had this reaction I think everyone else would have, which was like, I can't start a fund. This was 2018-ish. And I had 6 angel investments, like no track record. There was no reason why I should start a fund. He was like, Julia, like everyone that's ever worked with you would invest in your fund and I'll be your first LP. And so because he did that, I was like, oh shit, I need to take the money and run. Like I need to do it now. Like I didn't even have time to think about like, do I want to raise a fund? Is this a good, I mean, I knew I loved to invest. I'd been investing in the stock market like since high school. So like I knew I would always like to invest, but I was just like, I didn't have time to go through like the self-doubt or like really think things through. I had a bunch of friends start funds, so I knew it was like a possible thing to do. And I basically called one of my friends who worked at AngelList and I was like, cool, I know you guys are helping people start these funds. At the time, there weren't tons of emerging managers, but AngelList like onboarded a handful. And I was like, how do we do this? And I didn't have time to doubt or fear or any of that. And I don't think I'm like innately any like more special or capable than everyone else who has these ideas. I think I just ran faster because I wasn't thinking.
Looking back, I will say you do got it high octane, as I said as we kicked off this call. That definitely takes a certain amount of energy, but I love that perspective so much. And you truly have been a visionary, sort of like taking these leaps. I remember even through a mutual friend that you were kind of leading the charge to on AngelList, like move into some of like the more Web3 fund capabilities. And I think that's just really important, like saying yes, being willing to try, being willing to learn, being willing to fail. Is there a person or a company that's really inspiring you right now that people listening should follow or research or look into, especially as you think about the future? Like, where is this going? How can people kind of future-proof themselves?
So it's interesting. Actually, lately I've been doing almost the opposite, which is going backwards and reading about really, really great companies.
Cool.
And just remembering like I reread Shoe Dog recently, the Nike story, which could not be farther from Web3, like could not be farther from the future. Not that Nike's not the future, like
Right.
to not Nike, but just remembering like how freaking hard these things are. And I think in our era, like the great thing about the blockchain and the great thing about startups is like we have made things better, faster, cheaper, and in general, like we've made things easier. But I think to build really great things, it's still nearly impossible to build like a generational thing that's going to shift technology or the ecosystem. And so I've actually been doing the opposite, which is like going back and like reading about people who have built truly, truly remarkable things and understanding their journeys. It's almost like inspiration of like when things feel hard right now. I think for a lot of us, things feel really hard. Like everything feels hard. Like you look in one way and you're like, crap, regulation. Like another way, you're like, ooh, everything's overvalued and coming crashing down. Like another way, like you like cannot get a break. And so, but I think that's been true for almost everyone that's built anything great forever. And so it's been an exercise lately of like going back and reading these stories.
I was thinking about that because I read Shoe Dog also a while ago, and what a story of resilience, like,
every time you think the company's going to die, like the entire time you're like, this isn't going to work, there's no way.
Yeah, he's like selling it like shoe by shoe, and like it really is like a few lucky breaks, certain things just work out. And it takes perseverance, like years, it was not an overnight success. Like it took decades.
Yeah. The thing that a lot of these companies did have that I think is like a good reminder for founders too, is like they did have demand. So like they did build something people wanted for the most part. which I think can be a little bit tricky in our ecosystem where like historically, especially from like a venture side, a lot of the returns have been made at the infrastructure level. That's more foundational versus like a pulling of demand.
It's
But
on that point, like I think the thing I often think about is just the history of VC. And I also have been doing something similar, like looking back at the history of credit unions, the history of VC. What are these funding mechanisms? How were they designed? Why were they designed? And in a world where, VC literally came from moonshots for like space technology, where like actually like 1% of things should work. And then we apply that like sort of like unilaterally across like every kind of innovation or business. Other than that, like you basically have to have 2 years of proven track record revenue to have debt financing. Like that's a big difference. Like those are two very different things. Like, I'm curious your perspective on that too. Like, what is like the beyond VC model? Like, what is like the future of, capitalizing things that, to your point, like may not be the like moonshot infrastructure, which is typically all you'd need, but, maybe fits into a model which is just like a good business.
yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that I think is actually really interesting about DeFi is you can have a collective of people who are like, I mean, we have a portfolio company, not to like show my portfolio, but I think it's like a good example of that's funding climate projects by making it easier to invest in climate projects with the effectively like shorter lockup period so people can start earning returns immediately. It's called Solid World, where you can start earning returns for investing in mangrove projects or various climate projects without having to like invest your money, hold it for an unknown period of time, have a carbon future contract, then like maybe get carbon credits someday at some unknown price in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's not surprising to me that there isn't like a ton of liquidity for those sorts of projects when it's structured that way. Cause you look at that and you're like, why would I put my money in that versus like a bond or, any other form of like lending product. And so what's interesting about DeFi, and we can zoom out past DeFi after this, but like a group of people can be like, no, we think it's worth funding this type of project. And like, we think we have a model of how to do it. And like, therefore we're going to go do it. And so to zoom out kind of beyond that, I think we're going to see, and we already are seeing it, like so many different types of capital sources and types of financing in ways that like it can be governments, it can be companies, it can be individual people pooling money to finance different structures. And I think the limit on those types of structures is like, I mean, I don't think we've seen the limit.
Except for the regulatory constraints, right? Like I think that is consistently
the regulatory constraints are very concerning. And like there's some benefit to that, like protecting consumer. Like I get where that comes from. I'm not like 100% this is bad, but that is why a lot of the innovation is happening in DeFi, is because a lot of it's happening in the wild
anonymously. Yeah. Which is, I think not everyone even realizes that some of the reason it's so anonymous is that protection, and that, that doesn't necessarily mean it's legal. Like, and, that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down. But, there is like intense regulation around credit unions, private funds, sort of containers that we've seen now. And to your point, like DeFi is sort of emerging from that and really pushing the boundaries of what that collective funding can look like. I'm personally very excited to see where those experiments go, while also, hopefully having better guidance and protections, consumer protections, because we've seen a lot of upsets in the last year.
Totally. I mean, I guess in a dream world, one of the ways that I think about it is like you can have people that can be the Cayman Islands based entity, like they can be whatever, like kind of running these experiments and like hopefully finding these versions of financial products that we can then be like, cool, what's like the safe way to make this more mass available?
Yeah, totally. Instead of having to spend like $100,000 on a Cayman entity that may or may not have any true benefit. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I know we didn't talk too much about it, but like, I think Awesome People is incredible. It's both the fund, but also a talent collective and a newsletter that posts, incredible bios and of talent in the network. How else can we keep in touch with you personally as you're exploring, investing, learning, experimenting, and then within the fund as you invest and kind of set out your investment thesis to the world?
Probably the best way is just Twitter, at Julia Lipton on Twitter. Yeah.
Perfect.
Sometimes I'm active, sometimes I'm not, but you can always DM me.
That. Well, I know I'm currently following along and such a fan. So we'll link all of that here below for everyone who's listening. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for you for what you're doing, what you're building, how you're supporting founders. And thanks so much for sharing your perspective. This has been so much fun.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you.